Or to the cloud. Okay. So, hello everyone and welcome. Today I'm delighted to introduce you to Chiara Vargiu. Chiara is a PhD student in political science at the University of Lausanne, and she's actually going to submit her PhD thesis in a few weeks or months, I don't know, but so good luck with that. She's also a visiting PhD student at the Amsterdam School of Communication Research, based at University of Amsterdam, where she obtained her MSc in Communication Science. Her research involves perception and evaluation of elite incivility, and in fact, today she'll talk about the effect of political incivility on message persuasiveness and the moderating role of populist attitudes and personality traits. So thank you very much, Chiara, for being here, and I leave it to you.
Yeah, well, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so I'm presenting today a paper that I've been working with colleagues from the University of Amsterdam, Alessandro Nai, and another colleague, Chiara Vargiu, from the University of Bern, where indeed we look at incivility, my PhD topic, and its potential persuasive effect. So the idea is that I'm sure you've all heard about political incivility, which seems to be having a momentum worldwide. There's rise of candidates pretty much all around the globe that employ this more harsh, rude, disrespectful campaign style. The paradox here is that while these politicians have been ascending to power and they've been doing so while using such rhetoric, incivility is actually often perceived negatively and it's rejected. This is not surprising because incivility is essentially a norm-violating behavior, right? It's at odds with the social norms of politeness in social exchanges. And indeed, voters have declared disliking these kind of harsher forms of political rhetoric. So how to make sense of this conundrum? What we asked ourselves was, could actually incivility perhaps be accepted implicitly? So could incivility be persuasive? And could it be the case, especially for some people? So what we do is we did investigate whether incivility is persuasive, and if so, for whom this is more likely to be the case. So the first side of our puzzle, is incivility persuasive? Well, actually, probably not. There's many reasons to believe that that's not the case. We know that incivility decreases the evaluation of the sponsor of an uncivil message. It decreases people's tolerance for opposing ideas. It lowers the credibility of a source and also the perceived quality of a message, and also generates negative feelings like anger, disgust, contempt, which are all factors that indeed should decrease the persuasiveness of a political message. But then, is this the case for everybody? Well, probably not. There's an emerging research that is showing that incivility is in the eye of the beholder. Incivility is a matter of taste, right? These turn on like individual differences in the processing of political information. So we had a very simple intuition. Incivility is a stylistic hallmark of populist politician. So could it be particularly effective to persuade populist voters? Well, there's some theoretical backing for this expectation. Incivility, first of all, fostered this demonization of political adversaries, which fit in very well with the populist Manichaean worldview of an us versus them political landscape. Then incivility can also be considered as powerful weapon for rallying people who feel marginalized, right? So civility, as opposed to incivility, is the language of the elites, which often portrays opposing viewpoints as uncivil to delegitimize them. So incivility from a populist perspective, who share these feelings of marginalization and anti-establishment feeling, could become a weapon to express their frustration towards the establishment. And then again, if we consider populism as a communication style, we know that it thrives on disrupting the established socio-political norms. So incivility could serve as the visible manifestation of this disruptive approach that is preferred by populist voters. So we expected incivility to not be persuasive in general, but persuasive for populist voters. So how do we test this? We conducted an online factorial experiment on a Swiss sample. collected well, almost 2 years ago now. What we did was first we asked respondents their opinion about a controversial issue. Then we exposed them to new information about that same issues, and then we asked their opinion again. So that's how our design looked. We asked them their initial opinion, new information, and then their opinion again. And persuasion was measured as the difference between these two, their opinion initially and after exposure to the information. This is what the new information looked like. It was a discussion on affective social media among politicians and the public. The discussion is in German, so just to give you a sense of how it looked like. We manipulated experimentally the content of the discussion. It was a 2x2 experimental design. So the first factor, of course, was the civility or incivility of a message. So a civil message would showcase respect towards opposing viewpoints, while an uncivil message would disregard them, something like think any differently is complete bullshit, something like that. The other factor was the direction of the message. So respondents were also exposed to either message that was in line with their initial opinion or that went against it. This is an important distinction because, as we will see in the result, we actually found differential effect of incivility depending on the direction of the message. So jumping into the result immediately, these figures show the average score for message persuasiveness across the civil and uncivil condition, divided by first by all messages jointly, and then divided by incongruent and congruent messages. Well, results are a bit, well, disappointing. We don't find any significant effect of incivility from when considering all messages jointly, no significant effect for incongruent messages. We do find a significant effect of incivility and going in the expected direction for congruent messages. This effect is significant, but it also shouldn't be overstated because it is very small. As you can see, the range scale of message persuasiveness is reduced. I think it was a Cohen's d of 0.12, something like that. So it is still significant though. Then moderating effect, or actually non-moderating effect of populist attitude, because again, we don't find much. It was here's the interaction term. We don't find any significant effect of populist attitude on the effect of the persuasiveness of incivility. So how did we make sense of this? We thought, well, perhaps it's not populism per se that drives a preference for political incivility, but it is the underlying personality traits, aggressive personality traits that are often ascribed to populists. There's some studies showing that populists tend to be less agreeable, right? So less conflict avoidant. There's also some indication that populists, they share these dark core, right? It is dark triad of personalities, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, a more aggressive personality. So the idea was we conducted a second purely exploratory analysis on the moderating effect of personality traits and focusing in particular on the big five and the dark triad. Then again, it could be that this null effect of populist attitudes was due to the specificity of the Swiss context. The Swiss context is a very consensual-oriented country. It's actually ruled at the moment by the Swiss Populist Party. So it could be that results we found were due to the specificity of Switzerland. So we replicated our study in a completely different context than the US. So we collected data there in September 2024. Staying in Switzerland first, here are the effect of personality traits. So this is the interaction term between the incivility, so the civility or incivility of the message and each personality traits. Well, we didn't formulate a hypothesis, but we had some expectation. Here's at the bottom of the graph, there's the dark triad. So narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. So these all traits are related with more callous personality, lack of empathy, which you would have expected to increase the persuasiveness of incivility. And we do find some evidence of this, especially for trait psychopathy, and especially when incivility was embedded in an incongruent message. We would have also expected agreeableness to interact with incivility. We don't find this effect. So agreeableness, like, right, it is more cooperative, less more conflict avoidant. So the reasoning would be reversed, that higher agreeableness would reduce the persuasive avoidability, but we don't really find that. Moving to the US, our second replication study. Here, again, staying in the realm of personality, we do find similar trends. So there's, again, psychopathy. There's an effect of psychopathy, especially when incivility is embedded in incongruent messages. And we also find an effect of agreeableness, again, in the direction we would have expected. And interestingly, in the US, we do find also that the populist attitude matter for the persuasion of incivility. Once again, when incivility is embedded in an incongruent message. So in the US, as opposed to what happened in Switzerland, populists were indeed more receptive of political incivility. Okay, so what do we make of this finding? The null effect of incivility of message persuasion was unexpected, but indeed is not entirely surprising. And I haven't shown it, but we do find a similar effect in the US. So this null effect replicates also in the US context. It points, in fact, at this inherent tension that there is in uncivil rhetoric. So on the one hand, people think it is inappropriate. They don't like it. On the other, negativity bias were attracted by negative stimuli. Incivility is particularly shocking and attention-grabbing. It can even be perceived entertaining. So it could be that people find themselves more engaged with uncivil political messages. And then on the balance, the harms and the benefits of incivility actually cancel each other out, resulting exactly in as much persuasion as civility. The fact that we found that uncivil message backfired when aligned with the respondent's initial opinion. Well, we think that there's some intergroup thinking going on. So probably the direction of the message signaled to the respondents a particular specific source identity. So a congruent message, they probably perceive it as coming from an in-group source. And likely this resulted in a black sheep effect, when people try to protect their positive group identity by being more critical of in-group deviance. So instead of being biased in a way that we would have perhaps expected, right, to be more lenient towards in-groups, the opposite happens. The people are more critical with in-group deviance when it comes to incivility, and this is in line with previous findings in incivility research. Why we found a moderating effect of populist attitude in the US, but not in Switzerland. And as I was mentioning, this is probably due to contextual differences. We postulated on this effect based on this anti-establishment sentiment, marginalization of populist voters, right? This us versus the mentality on which incivility should tap into. Well, since Switzerland is a consensus-based political system, there's generally fewer negative sentiments against the establishment. And indeed, it is ruled at the moment at that moment, it was ruled by the populist Swiss People's Party, while the US, much more pronounced political divide, more polarized, stronger anti-establishment sentiment. So it could be the reason why we do find the significant effect of populist attitude in the US, but not in Switzerland. And then when it comes to personality, well, we have nuanced results, right? But we do find that personality traits, especially trait psychopathy method, hinting at the relevance of individual differences rooted in personality rather than ideology. And the fact that this effect was more evident for incongruent message is particularly interesting because it hints at the fact that incivility could actually engage a more aggressive individual with diverse viewpoints, right? So actually incivility could be, let's say, a positive force because it makes people engage with opposing opinions. And yeah. Well, thank you for your attention. And here's the paper. It was recently published, so you can have a look if you're interested.
Thank you very much, Chiara. That was very straight to the point, but interesting, and it leaves plenty of time for discussion. So I invite everyone to ask questions.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't ask how much time I had. I went with the 15 minutes.
Oh yeah, I think in one of my initial email, I have it.
Sorry, yeah.
But it's okay, don't worry. So we already have a question from Ulrike and Alan.
Should I go first? Mine is just an information question. So could you, thanks for super interesting. Could you say a little bit more about what incivility is and how it's actually operationalized in your materials?
Yeah, of course. So that's the first thing, right? Defining what incivility is. It's not easy because there's different theoretical tradition. There's more a deliberative framework on incivility that has to do more with the intolerance, and sometimes it includes racist, sexist, like this excluding stereotyping language. We define incivility as a violation of a politeness norm. So it's disrespectful language, rude language. It's language that conveys disrespect towards political opponents. So we operationalize. I think I can. I don't know if I have it on my slide, but yeah, no, it's not here. But yeah, the way we added to our persuasive message statements that would that would convey this respect towards opposing opinions. So as I said, one was like, thinking otherwise is complete bullshit, and this is of course one way of operationalizing incivility. It's not the only way, and I don't know if.
Just one more quick question. So how many of these materials do you have in your study? Is there like one set or is this, are there like 20 different instantiations of this, or I'm just...
No, so the wait. So we actually had, so the design was a little bit more complex than what I showed before. So people were actually could also be exposed to, we chose 3 different topics to make sure that our result would not only apply to one. And in the conversation, here's like the politician's statement. So here is the persuasive information, the new information they're exposed to. And here it reiterates it. And added to this, there were 2 sentences that were like a sentence here and a sentence there where the civil or uncivil information is embedded, right? So they see it, a statement here and a statement there. That it's either civil or uncivil. So that the new information stayed the same. We added to it a marker of disrespect towards opposing viewpoints. Yeah.
Okay, Alan.
Hi there. Thanks so much for the talk. I found it really very interesting. One thing I wanted to ask your view on was, so it looked like some of the things that you were checking for included like things like the content of the message, whether it could have matched the person's beliefs or not. And also you tested some kind of like personality traits of the audience. But I wondered whether you would also expect the kind of persuasiveness of civility or incivility to be influenced by facts about the speakers. We might think that the extent to which we're willing to kind of forgive incivility might in some way be influenced by various, I don't know, including, I guess, prejudices that we have. Such that we're kind of willing to give a pass to certain speakers for their incivility in a way that we wouldn't for others. And I was wondering, whether you would expect that to like influence like how persuasiveness, an example of uncivil speech, is likely to be, and then if so, whether that was something that we could learn from this study. So, for example, when they were getting the kind of new information, were they given any kind of information about the kind of fictional person that was saying the civil or uncivil things that might help to kind of help us to check, you know, whether facts about the speaker influence persuasiveness?
For sure. I'm currently working on another study, like a conjoint experiments where we manipulate the context of the message as well, including characteristic of the speakers. We don't find much actually, but I think this is the design issues. But absolutely, I mean, if by characteristic of the speakers in this design, we do see something right with the congruency of the message. That's where we think the differential effect of a congruent message comes. That people probably are biased by the direction of the message, that probably gives them some information on the speaker, right? Of information that we didn't want to necessarily provide. They probably think that this person is one of their own. So definitely there's the problem in studying incivility is precisely that there's probably an interplay with individual differences, right, in the processing of political information, and contextual factors, including the characteristics of the speakers. I mean, there's studies on the gender of the speakers, also something like the Gubitz on race in the US, and how the race of the speakers, the race of the speakers combining with the racial stereotype prejudice of the receiver of an uncivil message. So absolutely, that's why we looked into the congruence of the message to also have like part of that. This is as far as we could go with this design, though we couldn't really. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both. Steve.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting data, very interesting experiment. I got a whole bunch of questions and comments. So let me start maybe with a question comment relating to Oliver Hall's work. Are you familiar with that? H-A-H-L, Hall. He did a study some years ago where he showed that if you get people into a simulated frame of mind where they're left behind and disgruntled, you know, the usual populism thing, then they accept lying demagogues. They don't like people who lie to them, but they're happily accepted. I mean, you know, they're sort of tolerating it, let's put it that way. And so I wonder if your data are really another manifestation of the same thing, because when you look at across both studies, it does seem to be the case that the people who are either populist inclined in the US or who are aggressive in Switzerland, but they're the ones who are sort of buying into this. So I think that's a nice connection there in case you hadn't drawn it before. Now, I do have a question, though, if you don't mind going back to the data slides, because okay, so you're looking at the difference between the initial and the final opinion, but what I'm not sure about now is the polarity of that. And when you go to your bar charts, there were some that were going up and some that were going down. And
this
precisely.
Right.
Okay. Can you define what the axis here means?
Wait, because I actually have another slide, because the measurement of persuasion is a bit more complicated than that. So the persuasion variable is a -10 to +10, and that's because it depends. So persuasion is as a different sign, right? Depending on whether you're exposed to a congruent or incongruent information. And so if you're exposed to a message advocating, I think it's easier with an example. So one of the topic was the mandatory use of a pronoun for transgender individuals. That was one of the topic that we used. So if you would agree with that, right, and you were exposed to a message that advocated for the mandatory use, persuasion would a successful persuasion would go in the on the right, while a backfire unpersuasion would go on the opposite direction. And this actually is the other way around if you were exposed to a not congruent message. So that's why the variable goes from -10 to +10.
Okay, so then to go back to your previous slide, that means anything down is
so it means that for congruent messages, exactly. Anything down, it's
okay.
Persuaded. There's no difference in this case, because then we scale everything so that a -10 to +10.
Okay. Okay.
It is continuous in this sense, yeah. So a zero would mean that you haven't changed your opinion. Plus 10, you sort of polarized, let's say, like you even more convinced. No, sorry, I'm very sorry. It means that you were persuaded, regardless of whether it's a polarizing effect or an actual persuasive effect. And then a zero, a negative number would mean that you were unpersuaded.
Okay. So underlying these graphs, this graph here, are two different polarities.
Yes.
Because people who oppose pronouns, and who then are more opposed, are the same people as those who are endorsing pronouns and are more endorsing them after a congruent message, right? So is that correct? They're
Definitely.
Now, have you looked at it broken down by initial position?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not the persuasion expert. So my Chiara Vargiu, the other, she's Chiara and Alessandro have been working on persuasion together longer, and we have had discussion about this because indeed we are clumping together very different people. For one, what we call persuasiveness is actually a polarizing effect. So it's very different, or a deep, like it is different. We haven't really, because going into these subtleties and nuances, it's once you start playing with all these deep nuances, it gets very complicated. It gets very complicated to understand where the direction is going. And actually, I think the two of them are working on a methods paper on how to differentiate between all these different because also we struggle with, we ended up with message persuasiveness, because indeed we're not measuring persuasion, because persuasion would be, I expose you to information that goes against your opinion and I see it if it changes your mind, right? That's persuasion.
Right. Yes. Okay. And of course, there's also the problem here of different baselines, right? I mean, what do you do with people who are at 100%?
Yeah, we control for exactly. There's for sure some ceiling effects. We control for opinion extremity, so we do have in our models.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'll hand it over to Ulrika, although I may have a few more comments later if we have time.
Thanks.
You can go first. I'm no particular rush.
Yeah, but I don't want to dominate this whole thing. You go, Ulrika. I'm
Okay. I'm not going to resist the offer twice. So I have a kind of couple of questions for you to sort of speculate freely on with respect to context, and maybe you've done other studies on this or are planning other studies on this. So one thing I wondered is about the social media context in general, right? Like we might just sort of think, like I find it incredibly interesting, but it's a pretty incivil environment. So it might be kind of fairly baked in. And your effects might depend kind of strongly on the nature of the discourse in which this pops up, right? So it could be that even not only does it matter where this is happening, but even if it's in a social media context, if you had longer dialogues, right? Like, so you've got a whole bunch of people talking about this topic, and in pops Ulrika and says something incivil to Steve, that might be a kind of a very different proposition than just this excerpt, where you really don't have a sort of sense of any kind of baseline norm or tone that's been established, because it could contextually just be different. So that's the kind of first thing that I wondered with respect to your thoughts on.
Yeah, there's one study by Sitno, right, that looks at how on different media platforms, how the effects of incivility on different media platforms, and their text-based platform, their perception of incivility are much lower than in video format or audio format. So you can be much more uncivil in those platforms. One thing that while in the Swiss that's how it looked in the Yeah. So here we kind of had what you described, though, right? Like it's more over like a, because how you call it? A social media discussion, and then pops in the incivility. In the US study, we had a tweet. It was like just a politician, and we do find go, sorry.
I do think that has that, but what I was referring to specifically is there being a wider context of debate, right? There's already been 10 other people talking about this topic before Marco, pops in with his comment.
Okay, I understand. I mean, you make a very good point, because the context within which, for instance, in this conjoint experiment, one thing that we manipulate is precisely this, whether the uncivil comments comes in a civil or uncivil context. So in an election that is described as in an election that contains a lot of incivility, or an election that contains less incivility. And what we do found is that actually the more uncivil the electoral context is presented, though, so that's how it is presented to the respondents, the more they perceive a rude comment as the more they punish an uncivil comment, let's say. So the fact that there is an uncivil context, we cannot find it. We would expect it the other way around, that the more the context of itself is civil, then the uncivil comment would stand out less, right? That it would be less of a non-violation. We don't find that. I think that there's design issue in the sense that we primed respondents in this way to look at incivility. So by telling them, there's a lot of insults in this election, now tell me what you think of this comment. So we did prime them. But I do believe that there's definitely that when the incivility is unexpected, if it comes in a context that is at a low level of incivility, then it should stand out more. And this probably in a social media platform, maybe that's why it doesn't stand out as much, because we're used to it, we expect it, right? So I think that's what you were going for. That's what.
Yeah, and one last thing, Konstantinos, if I may. What if these were dialogues that people were actually actively participating in? What do you think would change?
Like if they could interact and they would.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a very. We were planning follow-up study on this.
Can I just interject, Ulrika? It's a very good question, but here's another question, even. Well, that's sort of at the beginning of your question, and that is, will people respond in kind? So if there's an uncivil seed to a conversation, are people going to go uncivil? And vice versa. And my guess is that it means that the seed of the conversation will make a big difference. And the reason I'm saying that is obvious to Fabio in particular, because he's leading a project on precisely that. Not civility, but the subtleties of how people consider honesty. We have shown we got a pretty cool study with Twitter conversations where we show that to be the case. So that would be my speculative answer to the sort of first part of Ulrika's question about what happens when people get engaged. Well, I think they mirror what they're being confronted with.
There is some studies on this. I don't work with the online incivility as much. This is one study I've done, but there is some study looking into precisely that, right? That people tend to mimic, especially when it comes from elites, right? That then
well, if you have that study, please email it to Fabio.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Constance.
Hi, I just have some speculations about why you may have had these results. Although I'm really not an expert in persuasion, so maybe this kind of design is very standard in persuasion research. But I'm a bit worried that maybe having the first opinion stated first, and then having just a few moments later the second opinion creates kind of an anchoring. So I wouldn't expect people to suddenly just switch their minds completely even if it was a persuasive message, just because they need to be kind of consistent with what they said. So this could be kind of a confound on why you wouldn't find, even though you might have really persuasive messages. So that is one concern. And the second one is, I'm also at UNIL. So but we never met because we're in different schools.
I've been in Amsterdam for the past year, so that's also maybe
Yes, but one thing that I wanted to mention is that civility is part of the Swiss identity, right? So it's not just that social identity might lead someone to feel that, oh, I don't like the fact that my in-group members are incivil, but it's also betraying the identity of a Swiss person being impolite. So it would be interesting to see with other, and that's why I think it is interesting that in the US you didn't find this result with congruent, where I guess it's not part of the identity.
There was one nuance that I didn't show actually, that in Switzerland we did find that a congruent uncivil message backlashed. In the US this didn't happen.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
that's exactly,
that was the result that I was referring to. So this is kind of an indication, and I agree with the interpretation that you gave, that it's I just wanted to support that it's probably also part of the identity that made people react like that.
There's definitely like cultural values that go very deep. I have this data where I look at normative beliefs on the use of incivility in 5 different countries. I have Australia, the US, Germany, Italy, and Argentina, and the differences are like in Australia, which is kind of known for having like pretty aggressive campaign. If you want to have fun, go have a look at Australian spot at election advertising. They're very fun to me, but extremely uncivil, one would say, and they have a tolerance for it. They much higher compared to people in Argentina, for instance, and that seems like more like. I suspect that there's like an individualistic element to it, that you're less concerned about this common good cooperation. You're less concerned about offending other people. So, and there's that. I mean, I didn't know that civility in Switzerland was part of the. But it doesn't surprise me.
Ulrike.
Thank you.
Yeah, just quick follow-up. What you just said there prompted me to remember another question I had, which is, have you looked at all at people's meta-beliefs about this? So have you done any studies where you ask what people think, how other people will respond to civil or uncivil messages?
I haven't, but that's actually because, I mean, one of the problem with this study, right, is that there's a certain amount of desirability bias when you ask people to rate the civility of a message or what do they think about it. So actually, this is a very good idea to kind of bypass it and get a sense of, okay, what do you think people in your circle would think of this? This is, thank you. No, I haven't, but yeah.
Steve?
Yeah, one other thing I was going to point out is that Philip Schmid, who's now at Radboud University, he has done a study where it's similar to yours, but with a very specific sort of correction of misinformation. So a slightly different paradigm, but very similar. And he compared civil and uncivil. And what he found was that the uncivil messages were as effective as the civil messages, much to his surprise and my surprise, and he gets big effects. And these are really uncivil messages, you know, kind of like, you moron, why do you believe this? Let me set you straight, okay? Something like
Yeah.
and very confronting.
Yeah.
Kind of a poster at ESCOM. They were pretty confronting messages. And they worked just as much as polite stuff. So really weird.
Is it
Not weird, but remarkable, and it kind of fits with what you found.
Is it a published study? Is it a
Well, that's a very good question. I have the suspicion, yes, but I couldn't point to the paper right now. But he's easy to find. Philip Schmidt at Radboud.
Okay.
I can check if it's my database, but I can't. I'm not sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I can't seem to find it right now, so maybe it hasn't come out. It was a poster presentation when I. Yeah, I can't find it. Oh, one other thing in this context, which relates to populism as well, I think, is reactance. One of the things that we have observed a great deal in the vaccination arena is that reactance is an incredibly powerful driver in all of this. And some people just go crazy if you present them with information, no matter what it is. They just say, "Don't you even think about telling me what to do?"
Yeah.
And I wonder how that is interacting with incivility, because they're the people who are most incivil themselves, I find, when they're telling, I don't care what the scientists are telling me, I know better because I'm a mother or something, that kind of totally reliance on intuition. But I also have the sneaking suspicion that they would actually be swayed by uncivil messages, because it's kind of like, maybe you do have to, if you put a boot
at their level.
fall over, even if they show reactance. I mean, that's a very brutal picture of the world, but I wonder if you know anything about that.
I mean, the fact that when we do find moderating effect, also for populists, it came for incongruent messages, right? So the fact what you're describing, that actually incivility could help these people interact with opposing viewpoints, there is some hint of that in our data. And I mean, I also think that it goes specifically to what you said. As you said, I find that they are the most uncivil to me, right? So the idea, and that's actually the argument that I put forward in my dissertation, is that probably to these people, this kind of language does not really count as uncivil. It is disrespectful, it is impolite, but the concept of civility or incivility goes beyond that, right? So probably they actually appreciate a forceful response, potentially regarding that more civil, more in the terms of like a normative evaluative component of civility, right? So what should be done, and not necessarily disrespect. Also, these people are so exposed to disrespect, they're probably numb to it. That is not really what disgusts or what repels them. Actually, a more meek politeness could be interpreted the other way around, right? You're weak. You're not convinced. You're a sheep. Also, with the vaccination thing, like this sheep mentality that anti-vax people attribute to. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Ulrike.
Well, if I can ask one more question, I will. My own particular interest in this actually kind of comes from not the sort of individual level persuasion thing, but on the sort of the impact on the discourse, and in particular, like who stays and who goes. And there's this risk with incivility that you might sort of win the battle, right? Like your results are sort of suggesting you might not even lose the battle but you might lose the war because people just don't want to be part of that. Is that anything that you've looked into?
I think because we embedded this study was embedded in a bigger project that was actually led by my other co-author, Chiara Vargiu, and I think that part of like they after being exposed to this blog post, they were actually people were asked if they wanted to participate into the discussion. I think they have something after. I'm not sure if they have already looked into the result, if it's something that she's working on, but it's definitely that's something that she's working on, because you make an absolutely good point. It might be that in the short term, it's not harmful. Short terms it helps, but then we're actually eroding the quality. The only people that would keep on that stays are the more aggressive individuals, right? So at the end of the day, you have a big host of people that they're like, I don't like this. It's like a self-reinforcing cycle of incivility attracts. And one thing that I found is that incivility also is more liked by more politically interested people. So more politically interested people actually like incivility. So if we couple that with the kind of interested people that are appreciative of incivility, yeah, definitely there is the potential of creating a big divide and a big disenfranchising power of incivility. Actually, on the one hand, disenfranchising certain people, and on the other, engaging not necessarily the people that would want to be the most engaged or not engaged in this way, at least. Yeah, but I can. I'm gonna ask her actually if they have done something with that.
Thank you. I have a question that links more or less with Konstantinos said about Swiss people having an inherent trait of civility, so praising them. And still you mentioned, provided that I don't know anything about Swiss politics, you mentioned that a populist party is ruling then the country. So I wonder if did they use any incivil message there? Because it would be surprising. Also, you mentioned that, for example, if I got it right, in Argentina, you found that Argentinian people are less tolerant than incivility, and yet we have Javier Milei there. So it seems that we cannot actually resolve the conundrum. Do they win because of incivility or despite that, or maybe because different people vote for them for different reasons?
Yeah, this is it's hard to make sense of it, because precisely this, right? There's so many factors, and this was one of the questions that was asked before. There's probably so many factors that interacts to shape perception, evaluation, and reactions to incivility, right? I also find it very difficult to test this effect like experimentally like this, because it's very different also to be exposed to incivility like this than, for instance, to a rally, right? It's completely different. The fact that you're surrounded by people that are chanting, it makes it completely different. So even the data that I have that suggests that in Argentina people are very they punish incivility more. Well, okay, does that happen though when they're all together in a rally? Is it really the case? I'm asking them what they think. There could be like an ideal that they have that actually when in practice is different. And again, amongst them, there's probably different people find it different. So yeah, it is, there's too much that goes into it, and every time that I try to narrow the focus on, okay, this is what shapes it, I end up missing the bigger picture, right? It's very difficult when you try to pinpoint, okay, but it's not just one factor, it's definitely multi-causal. Like yeah.
Thank you.
And I don't really know about the you said if they're campaigning Switzerland, the populist party as I would assume that they do, but just because populists tend to, but I honestly I'm not I don't know.
Okay. Do we have any questions left? We still have 10 minutes. Otherwise we can finish a bit earlier. Well, if not, thank you very much, Chiara, for being here and for this incredible presentation, and also all the best for your dissertation. So when is that going to happen?
I'm gonna submit of 30th of May is the last is my deadline. So yeah.
2 weeks. Fingers crossed. And thank you very much to everyone for the lively discussion. And I'll see you. Well, not next week. I'll send a reminder about that. There's no meeting next week, and
hang on. There's Michael's meeting. Isn't that next
but
week?
that should be on the 23rd.
Oh, you're right. That's in 2 weeks, of course. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank you
much,
everyone.
it was
See
great.
ya.
Thanks.